Today I'm continuing a series talking about financial stewardship. And I tell you, I have really enjoyed the things that I've been teaching. These are things that God has spoken to me that have made a big difference in my life. Today I want to turn over to Luke chapter 16 and go into this parable about the unjust steward. And I've mentioned this a couple of times already in this teaching, but we haven't actually taught through this. This parable is one of the hardest to understand, and really you have to have quite a revelation on prosperity before you can really understand what this is talking about. And so I think that as we go through this, that this really has the potential of making a big difference in the way you view money and the way you use money. So let's look at this in Luke chapter 16, verse 1. It says, "And he said also unto his disciples," this is Jesus speaking to his disciples, "There was a certain rich man which had a steward, and the same was accused unto him that he had wasted his goods. And he called him and said unto him, How is it that I hear this of thee? Give an account of thy stewardship, for thou mayest be no longer steward." All this is saying that a person who is wealthy had a person working for him managing his money. He had been accused that he was stealing money from him, so he said, basically, put your books in order, come in here and show me everything, and if what you've been accused of is true, then you're going to be fired. And in verse 3 it says, "Then the steward said within himself, What shall I do? For my Lord taketh away from me the stewardship. I cannot dig. To beg I'm ashamed." Now in verse 3 we see by the reaction of this steward that he was guilty, because there was no statement about I'm innocent, how can I prove my innocence, or how can I do any of these things. He knew that when he was called into account and when his master looked at the books that he'd be fired. So this is basically an admission of guilt on the steward's part. And notice also he says, I cannot dig. To beg I'm ashamed. Probably most people that have his attitude towards finances, where he was stealing money and instead of working and doing things like this, it's probably not true that he couldn't dig. It was probably more true to say that he wouldn't dig. You'll find out that a lot of people that have problems in this area of finances and things, people who steal, it's not that they couldn't work, it's that they're lazy. They're looking for a quick fix. They're looking to win the lottery. And I might as well say some things here. I've probably already driven lots of people away with all the stuff I've said. But I tell you what, if you're playing the lottery and looking to win from that, you got a wrong attitude towards finances. That is never God's system. It's not that it's necessarily sin or anything, but it is a compromise. It's not God's way of wealth. And anybody who's buying lottery tickets, you do not have a revelation on prosperity based on the Word. Now, you may not like me for that, but it's the truth. Galatians 4:16 says, Am I become your enemy because I tell you the truth? It's the truth. And if you'll stick with me as we go through this system, I'll even teach on that and show you why gambling and expecting to get rich quick is never God's system of prosperity. It's an ungodly thing. And even if somehow or another you were to strike it rich or win the lottery, the Scripture says that wealth gotten by vanity takes away the life of the owners thereof. So it's not a matter of about just getting money however you can. There's a right and a wrong way to prosper. And even if you did hit the lottery and if you did prosper somehow, if you didn't do it through God's system, which the lottery is never God's system, then it would take away your life. And so that's not the right way to prosper. So anyway, people who are lazy tend to steal, look for the lottery, look for something. And I know that there's going to be people criticize me and say, you don't understand my situation. There could be an exception with as many people viewing this program around the world. There's probably exceptions to everything. But as a general rule, it's, matter of fact, I could give you statistics that the people who buy lottery tickets, about 80 to 90% of them are all in the poverty level. It's poor people that are looking for a lottery. People that have money, they value money differently. They think about money differently, and they don't waste money throwing it away on buying a lottery ticket. Have you ever heard those commercials where they say the chances in winning are 1 out of 520 million? And I just think, whoever would go for that and spend money on something like that with the odds so stacked against you, No wonder you aren't prospering if that's the kind of stuff that you give your money to. And somebody says, well, it's just a few dollars. I mean, what's it going to hurt? It's the principle of the thing. A person that has strong convictions and strong financial principles, you just don't deviate from them, even for just a few dollars here and things like that. Anyway, the point that I'm making is this guy said, I cannot dig. I'm sure he could have gone out and got a job if he wanted to, but you know what? That's not the way he thought. He didn't want to work to get his money. He wanted to steal it, or he wanted to buy a lottery ticket, or he wanted to inherit it, or something. He's always looking for some scheme instead of just believing that God would bless his work. And then he said, to beg, I'm ashamed. You know, it's a shame that he wasn't afraid to steal or ashamed to steal. He wasn't ashamed to steal. He was ashamed to beg. You ought to be just as ashamed of stealing as you are of begging. Man, it's amazing how we have selective conscience in this area. And so, because he was ashamed to beg and he wouldn't go work, he says, I am resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses. So he called every one of his Lord's debtors unto him. Now this parable goes on and only lists two people who owed his master money. And it only lists two of them, but it says that he called every one of them. So it's possible that they just gave two as an example of what he did. But apparently he called in every one. And if his master was truly a rich man, I know that if I only had two people that owed me money, I probably wouldn't hire somebody else to run my financial affairs. So it's probable that this guy had dozens, maybe hundreds of people. He was a very rich man, and so he called in every one of his Lord's debtors unto him, and he said unto the first, How much owest thou unto my Lord? And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said unto him, Take thy bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then said he to another, And how much owest thou? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said unto him, Take thy bill and write 80. So what he did, this is showing two examples. He called in these people who owed his master money, and he told one, he says, just cut your debt in half. Here's a new agreement. Let's write this out. And instead of saying that you owe 100 measures of oil, let's cut it down to 50. And then another one, he said, how much do you owe? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he says, write 80. So he discounted it 20%. So basically, this is just showing that he started discounting people's debts to his master while he still had that position of authority. And here's the logic behind it. He said, I'm doing this so that when I'm put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses. In other words, he wasn't going to go work. He was too lazy to work. He wasn't going to beg. He was too ashamed to do that. So what he decided to do, he still was stealing money from his master. He didn't quit stealing money. But this time, instead of putting the money in his pocket, he put the money in the pocket of people who owed his master money. He discounted their accounts. I don't know how much 100 measures of oil is worth, but it could have been worth $300,000-$400,000, and you just gave away, say, $150,000 or $200,000 to this person. And he did this to every one of his Lord's debtors, and so that means there could have been dozens, maybe 100 people that he just gave his master's money away to them. And the logic behind it was that when he got fired, he'd be able to go knock on their door and say, did you hear that I've been fired? Do you remember that I discounted your bill $200,000? Could you help me out here? Could I stay with you for a week or two? Would you feed me and help me get back on my feet? And he would have dozens or hundreds of people like this, and he'd just be able to mooch off of these people. That's what he was doing. So, up until this point in this story, there really isn't anything hard to understand or unusual about this. People steal money all of the time from their employers, and it's really not unusual what he's done. But what is really unusual is his master's reaction to this. Look at this in verse 8. It says, the Lord commended the unjust steward because he had done wisely, for the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. Now this is what makes this parable hard to understand. The first part where he's stealing money from his master and he gets called on the carpet and he still steals some more, but this time he gives it to other people. That's not so unusual. What is really strange is the master's reaction where it says he commended the unjust steward because he had done wisely. For the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. Now, what did this man do that was wise? He was still stealing money. This isn't the Lord's approval on dishonesty. But the point that's being made here is an attitude towards money. Prior to this time, prior to the master calling this steward in and saying, set your books in order and I'm going to look at them, and if you're guilty, you're fired. Prior to that time, when he thought he was getting away with it, he stole money from his master. And there's no telling how much money he stole, but let's just say it was $100,000 or $200,000 or $500,000. Could have been more. If he stole all of this, did you know he didn't have anything to show for it? Now that's evident because in the 3rd verse, when he knew that he was going to be fired from his job, the steward said within himself, what shall I do? For my Lord taketh away from me the stewardship. I cannot dig to beg, I'm ashamed. In other words, if he would have been stealing money from his master, but if he would have taken that stolen money and have invested it, put it in a bank account, been buying stocks, making some type of investment, he wouldn't have had this attitude. He wouldn't have even had to think about begging. He would have been able to live off of that money that he had stolen. But this says that he had taken all of this money that he was stolen. And again, we don't know how much it was, but I'm sure it wasn't a trifling amount. It was a major sum of money, and he had just blown it. He had been buying caviar and DVDs and VCRs and plasma screen televisions, and he had blown it on things. But he didn't have anything to show for it. He didn't have any money, any reserves. And you know why the master commended this servant was because even though he was still stealing money, this time he began to recognize the power that was in money to affect his future. Prior to that time, he had stolen money, but he had just blown it on buying things. Now he was still stealing money, but this time he was using it and putting it in people's pockets. In a sense, what he was doing was bribing them. He was using the power of money to affect people's lives, to change their attitude towards him, and to affect his future. Now again, this isn't saying that you're supposed to use your money to bribe people. It's not saying that you're supposed to continue to steal money. But it's illustrating the fact that this guy had a huge paradigm shift in the way he looked at money. Prior to that time, he was just using money to blow it on things that, didn't amount to anything, just satisfying his own lust. But once he realized he was about to lose his job, that this cush position that he had been in was going to be taken away from him and he was going to have to deal with reality, all of a sudden he started taking the money he was stealing and he used it to change people, to touch people, and affect his future. And this is why the master commended this guy. Because he finally began to start learning the true potential and the true benefit of money. Now this is an amazing fact. You're going to have to think a little bit to be able to get this, but this is powerful. This is powerful stuff. Did you know that the least use of your money, man, I hesitate to say these things because I know some people this is going to go right over your head. Some people you're going to just totally reject what I've got to say. But I ask you to pray about this because I'm going to show you a number of scriptures that will verify this. The least use of your money, the most unimportant use of your money is to just buy temporary things that are just going to meet your needs, such as your house, your car, your clothes, your food, and things like that. Now, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. You have to have those things. You have to have clothes. It's a godly thing to wear clothes. It's a godly thing to eat. Not to overeat, but to eat. It's a godly thing to have a house and to have a car, have transportation and be able to get around and function. There's nothing wrong with those things, and so we have to do them. But you ought to have this attitude that, God, that is the least important use of my money, is for these physical, natural things. The real true potential of money is to affect your future. I don't know if you get that or not, but that is a powerful statement. Money can affect your future. You can either use money to just survive and live right now, or you can take money, and of course you've got to do certain things to be able to survive and live now, but if you took a portion of that and invested it or did something to affect your future, did you know that that is a wiser, higher use of your money? Now again, that's not the attitude that most people have. Most people see money as a way of them satisfying their own desires, and this is the reason that advertisers advertise the way that they do. They come on and say, for 3 days only, do this. In other words, they're trying to pressure you to spend it right now, and you may not even have a need right now, but it looks so good, and you go ahead and you put it on credit. They'll give you interest free for a certain period of time. And our society has come to a place where it's like, I can get everything right now and then spend the rest of my life paying for these things that I've already got. That is a wrong mindset. What you need to do is learn how to live less with what you have and not go into debt and not run up all of these bills, and take a portion of what you've got and start using that to affect your future. You know, I heard a man say that retirement ought to be the biggest, best vacation that you've ever taken. And what he's trying to get across through that is that sometimes we take away from our future retirement and what we're going to need in our older age and stuff like that, and we just basically spend it all on just enjoying the present. Now, there's a balance between these two. I'm not telling you to keep your nose to the grindstone and not enjoy the journey. But I'm saying that we have gone way out of balance in the other direction, so that basically, in the United States at least, I can say this, people are mortgaging their future so that they can enjoy everything right now. And they are just indulging themselves and getting everything they can, and they aren't planning for the future. That's the way that this unjust steward was. He had stolen lots of money. No telling how much money he had stolen, but he had just blown it on things, and it's evident because he didn't have anything to fall back on. He was going to be out on the street begging. He had stolen large sums of money and didn't have a penny to show for it. That was wrong attitude. Of course, it's wrong to steal, but let's just take the stealing out of the picture. His attitude towards money was just use it to indulge your flesh, to get what I want, to do this, to supply my needs. I'm sure the guy ate well. I'm sure that he dressed well. I'm sure that he had all of the creature comforts that they had available in those days, and that's what his focus was on money for. But when he got called on the carpet and he realized he was going to be fired, he had to start thinking about his future. What am I going to do in the future? This is going to look terrible on my resume. Nobody's ever going to hire me. This is the only thing I know how to do is to be a steward, and I'll never get another job. And he says, what am I going to do? And he still was stealing money. That wasn't commended. But at least the money he stole, he now began to start. Instead, I guarantee you, he didn't go out and buy any new television with this. He didn't buy a DVD. He didn't buy any of these little gadgets. This guy took all of the money he stole from that point on, and he began to start giving it to people to affect their attitude, to affect the way they felt about him, so that when he was fired, he could go out and he could mooch off of these people. And this is why his master commended him. He says, finally, you're beginning to learn the real use of money. And here is a radical statement that I pray you can listen to and receive and apply in your life. But when you understand prosperity properly, when you begin to start getting the right attitude about being a steward, did you know money isn't primarily for meeting your immediate needs? Now again, you need to meet your needs. You need to be a faithful witness. You need to pay. God doesn't want you living in a cardboard box somewhere. That's not a good recommendation for Him. So I'm not saying that you don't take care of yourself, but I'm saying that your priority ought to drastically change from just getting things for yourself, taking care of yourself, and your attitude ought to change to where it's all about taking that money to touch other people's lives and to influence your future. Money has power in it. Some people take great offense at this because a lot of religious teaching has actually made it like money is terrible. Matter of fact, it'll even talk down here about, well, that's in 1 Timothy, I believe, chapter 3, where it talks about filthy lucre, which is the old English way of referring to money. And it makes it sound like it's evil, like it's sinful. And sometimes religious teaching will make it sound like that, having money, people who are wealthy are just all evil people and things like this. Well, Abraham was super wealthy. Isaac, Jacob were super wealthy. David and Solomon and on you could go. It is not ungodly to have money. It's just ungodly when you put your trust in that money instead of your trust in God. And so money has power in it, but the power, most people are using the power and the influence of money for just temporary things. I don't know if you can understand what I'm saying. Let's go on and read this next verse. Here's Jesus drawing a conclusion from this parable and making an application to us. Look at what it says here in Luke chapter 16, verse 9. And I say unto you, this is Jesus speaking, make to yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness. That's an old English way for saying money. Use money to make friends that when you fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations. Now this is the purpose of this parable. This is the point that Jesus was trying to get across. He says, now, here's the point. Just like this man, of course, you don't steal your money, but nonetheless, the money that he had, he began to start using it to make friends, to touch people's lives so that they would receive him into their home. Jesus says, in a similar way, you should start using money to touch people's lives so that when you fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations. The word that was translated fail here in the King James, it was also translated die other places in the Scripture, and that's exactly what this is referring to. This is saying use money to start affecting people's lives so that when you die, they will be there to receive you into everlasting habitations. This is talking about when we go to heaven. And so here's the point that he's making. This man, this unjust steward, had stolen money, but all of the money he had stolen, he just blew it on temporary things. Things that in themselves may not have been bad, but he took all of this money that he had stolen and just wasted it because when he was facing being fired, he didn't have anything to fall back on. He says, I'm going to have to beg. I'm ashamed to beg. So he hadn't saved any. He hadn't prepared for his future. He hadn't used this money to make friends, to touch people's lives. He hadn't shared it with other people. He hadn't done anything except just blow it on temporary, carnal things that he felt like he needed at the moment. But when he got under pressure and it looked like he was going to lose his job, he took the money that he had stolen from his master and he began to touch people's lives with it and bless them and make them beholden to him so that when he was fired, he could enter into their house and live with them. The Lord is saying we need to start using money to affect people's lives so that when we die, they will be there to welcome us into heaven. Some of you have probably heard this song before about a man who dreamed he died and went to heaven, and when he got to heaven, there were all these people lined up, and people came up and said, thank you for giving to the Lord. I'm a life that was changed. And he was perplexed at first about what all this meant, but they told him that when you gave that money to this missionary, he went over to Africa or someplace, and he's the one that taught the gospel to me, and I'm here today because of your gift. Thank you for giving to the Lord. Did you know that that is a dramatization, of course, but it's exactly what this passage of Scripture is talking about. Jesus is saying that we ought to learn from this parable that there is a better use of our money than just blowing it on things. That we ought to give, to touch people's lives, to see people change, so that someday when we enter into heaven, there will be people lined up to say thank you. Did you know that every television you buy is eventually going to die? I mean, it may not physically die like we talk about a person, but I mean it's going to cease to work. It's going to have to be replaced. And every house that you buy, every car that you buy, all of the clothes that you buy, the jewelry, the rings, the diamonds, everything that we invest so much effort into to get these things, did you know that someday those things are going to wear out? And even if it was something like a family heirloom, like a diamond that's not going to cease to exist, did you know that someday there's going to be an end to this world, and the Lord said that He's going to destroy this earth and everything in it by a fervent heat, and even diamonds, jewelry, whatever you have built, whatever monument you have made to yourself is someday going to be totally gone, and it will cease to exist. But every bit of money that you use to touch a person's life, every bit of money that you give into the gospel, And because of it, somebody gets born again. Somebody's life gets changed. A marriage gets put together. A body is healed. Somebody learns the truth and it sets them free. Every person who gets changed because of the money that you give, did you know that that is something that will never cease? It will go throughout eternity. And someday, millions of years after this earth is gone. And I know that some of you don't think this way, but it's what the Scripture teaches, and it is going to happen. There is going to be a time that we will be millions of years removed from where we are right now. And everything in this earth life will be a memory. It will be gone. It'll be over. You are going to exist for eternity in a future state. Hopefully you are born again and have committed your life to the Lord, and you're going to live forever in heaven. But if not, there is another place called hell or the lake of fire where people are going to exist. And we are going to live much longer in those realms than we are right here. And did you know that only the money that you took and changed it into something that touched a person's life, that money that you invested in people will continue to pay dividends to you throughout all eternity.